St. Michael's Hospital in San Antonio smells like antiseptic and burnt coffee at 0600. Ashley Cooper moves through the cardiac ICU with practiced invisibility, checking vitals on room 412, 4-star General Whitmore, 68, post-cardiac surgery, the man who commanded her son's Special Forces unit in combat. Her scrubs are 2 sizes too big. Her badge reads Ashley Cooper, RN, with no other designation. Inside her jacket lining, pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat, is a faded 3rd Special Forces Group unit patch, the same unit her son Marcus serves in overseas, the same unit the general led in Tikrit 2 years ago. She touches it unconsciously during morning rounds. The fabric is soft from 17 years of carrying it, worn at the edges where fingers have found it in dark moments. When General Whitmore's oxygen saturation dips from 98 to 96, she adjusts the nasal cannula without being asked, checking the tubing for kinks, watching the monitor climb back to 99. The general's eyes are closed. He won't remember. But Ashley remembers everything. She remembers Tikrit. She remembers hand steady in chaos. She remembers why she's here. The nursing position isn't a job. It's Operation Sentinel Shield, a Pentagon counterintelligence placement buried so deep that only 3 people at St. Michael's know the truth. Ashley was recruited by her commanding officer 6 months ago. The briefing lasted for minutes. The general in room 412 had flagged a potential security breach in the military's medical data system. General Whitmore was admitted for post-operative cardiac recovery, and JSOC wanted to monitor him in a civilian hospital where nobody would expect it. Ashley volunteered before the officer finished speaking. Her son was out there somewhere in active deployment. The general had led his unit. The math was simple. The fluorescent lights hum above her head, a sound like insects trapped in plastic. Ashley's reflection in the medication cart shows a woman who's learned to disappear. Round shoulders. Downcast eyes. Hair pulled back so tight it stretches the skin at her temples. The timid nurse. The one who asks permission before touching supplies. The one who defers to every doctor, every resident, every hierarchy that exists in a hospital. That wasn't who she was. Not really. Dr. Harrison Pierce arrives at 0630 with 12 residents trailing behind him like ducks in formation. He's 52, silver-haired, built like a man who does cardio but not actual work. His white coat is pristine, actually pristine, like he changes it hourly. He carries a tablet that he uses the way generals use maps, scanning and assessing and dismissing in 3-second intervals. His voice is the kind of voice that makes people smaller. Not loud. Precise. Surgical. Sharp enough to draw blood without raising volume. The rounds begin in room 410. Standard post-op checklist. Vitals, surgical site, pain management. Pierce moves through the questions like a man reading a shopping list. The residents scramble to keep up, scribbling notes, nodding at everything he says. At 0647, the procession reaches room 412. General Whitmore. Ashley is already there. She's been there since 0615, checking the cardiac monitor, adjusting the telemetry leads, verifying the heparin infusion rate. The general's chart is open on the computer. Everything is documented, recorded, verified. Ashley stands at the foot of the bed, giving space, making herself part of the background. Pierce glances at her. Up and down. A full-body assessment that takes 2 seconds. She watches his eyes land on her hands, they're shaking slightly. They're always shaking slightly now, even after 17 years. Muscle memory from holding arteries together while mortars fell around her. 17 years and the hands still remember. Vitals? Pierce asks the room, not Ashley. One of the residents, a third-year named Chen with excellent handwriting and zero confidence, steps forward. BP 118/74, heart rate 62, O2 sat 99 on 2 liters nasal cannula. No arrhythmia overnight. Pierce nods. He approaches the bed and performs his own assessment. He listens to the heart. Lungs clear. Abdomen soft. He checks the surgical incision, clean, no signs of infection. The general wakes slightly, groggy, and Pierce speaks to him the way people speak to children. Loud and slow. "You're doing well, sir. Excellent recovery. We're very pleased with your progress." The general mumbles something. His eyes find Ashley for a moment, then close again. Pierce turns to the residents. "Anyone see anything concerning?" Silence. Chen shuffles his feet. It's then that Ashley notices the heparin order on the monitor. The dose. She studied this chart obsessively, protocol requires it. She knows what the general's weight is. She knows what his last renal function panel showed. She knows that the dosage Pierce wrote is 6,000 units for bolus followed by 18 units per kilogram per hour drip. For a 190-pound male with normal renal function and no bleeding complications, that's too aggressive. It's 15% higher than the standard post-operative dosage. High enough to increase bleeding risk. Not catastrophic. But not right. She doesn't think about it. Her hands move. "Dr. Pierce?" The room goes quiet. The residents turn. Pierce's head swivels toward her with the precision of a gun sight. "Yes?" His voice could freeze water. "The heparin dosage." "For General Whitmore." Ashley's own voice is quiet. Respectful. The voice of a woman asking permission to speak. His weight is 190 pounds. Renal function normal as of yesterday's labs. Standard post-operative bolus would be 5,000 units, not 6,000. And the drip, 18 units per kilogram times 86 kilograms. That's 1,548 units per hour. The standard recommendation for post-op is 1,200 to 1,400. Pierce's jaw tightens. She watches it happen. A small muscle at the angle of his jaw pulses once. The dosage is appropriate for his presentation, Pierce says. Each word is separate, distinct, like bullets. Which is exactly why I'm the physician and you're the nurse. Of course, doctor. Ashley nods. Steps back. Makes herself smaller. But she's already corrected him. And in a hospital with 12 residents watching, a correction is a wound that doesn't heal. Pierce turns back to the residents. Let's move on. Room for 13. He doesn't look at Ashley again. Doesn't need to. The message is already being transmitted through micro-expressions and posture and the way the residents suddenly avoid her eyes. They leave. The room settles back into the sound of the monitor, the whisper of the ventilator in the next bed, the distant sound of a code cart being pushed down the hall. General Whitmore is asleep. Ashley makes a note in the chart, not about the dosage error, that's not her place, but about his oxygen saturation, his comfort level, his current mental status. Everything documented. Everything by protocol. She adjusts his blanket. His hand is warm. By 0900, the rumors have started. Ashley hears them when she's replacing the sharps container in the supply room. 2 nurses from the night shift, they don't know she's there. Pierce is pissed. Apparently, she told him his dosage was wrong. Like she would know better than a board-certified cardiologist. The second voice belongs to Maya, a decent nurse with 3 years of experience and a tendency toward gossip. I heard she bought her credentials online. That's why she's so timid, she's terrified someone's going to find out. The supply room door is open a crack. Ashley can see them through the gap. Maya is holding a coffee cup that says blessed and caffeinated. The other nurse, Rodriguez, night shift charge, shakes her head. That explains so much. Who corrects Dr. Pierce? You have to have no idea what you're doing to pull something that stupid. Ashley closes the door quietly. She takes the sharps container she's holding and disposes of the biohazard material, methodical, careful, each movement precise. Her hands aren't shaking anymore. That's how you know it's bad, when the hands get steady. When the body goes from fight or flight to cold calculation. By noon, the rumors have grown. Credentials from an online diploma mill. She failed the NCLEX 3 times before passing. She slept with someone in administration to get hired. Ashley hears these versions while she's charting, while she's preparing medications, while she's checking on General Whitmore in room for 12, who is blissfully unaware that the woman monitoring his cardiac status has suddenly become a leper. Dr. Pierce passes her in the hallway at 1300. He doesn't acknowledge her, but he speaks loud enough for the residents around him to hear. You know, in medicine, it's important to recognize the limits of your knowledge. Interventions outside your training can be dangerous, potentially deadly. We have protocols for a reason. The residents nod. One of them glances at Ashley. Pity or contempt, she can't tell anymore. She keeps walking. She has 4 more patients to check. General Whitmore's for is running clear. No signs of heparin-related complications. The dosage error hasn't manifested yet, probably won't. But it's there, sitting in the general's veins like a secret. At 14:45, Pierce appears at the medication station where Ashley is documenting pain medication administration. He leans against the counter. Not close enough to be threatening. Close enough to be present. How long have you been a nurse? He asks. Ashley looks up from her charting. His expression is neutral. Curious. Deadly. 6 months at St. Michael's, doctor. Before that? Various positions. That's vague. He smiles. Not a kind smile. The kind of smile that says he's about to enjoy this. You know, I have a contact at the board of nursing. Very dear friend. We talk regularly. I mentioned your name. Interesting, she couldn't find your prior employment history. Nothing before 6 months ago. No prior hospitals, no prior clinics, no documentation of previous work. Ashley's hands continue moving, documenting, signing off on medications. She doesn't look at him. It's all there, she says quietly. In my employment file. HR has everything. I'm sure they do. Pierce straightens up. I'm just saying, if anyone ever questions your credentials, there might be gaps. Inconsistencies. Hard to explain in an interview with the state board. Hard to explain to a malpractice insurance company. Very unfortunate. He leaves. His footsteps echo down the hallway. Ashley sits down. For the first time all day, she lets her hands shake. She presses both palms flat against the medication station counter and feels the tremor move through her forearms, her shoulders, up into her chest. It's not fear. Not anymore. After Tikrit, after holding the perimeter with 14 casualties bleeding out around her, fear is a currency she can't afford. It's rage. It's the kind of rage that has a shape and weight and the ability to do real damage. The kind of rage that has to be locked down and stored away because if she lets it out, even a little bit, Dr. Harrison Pierce will see exactly who he's been talking down to. And that will end everything. She takes one long breath. Then another. She releases the counter. Her hands are steady again. At the end of her shift, Ashley changes out of her scrubs in the locker room. No one else is there. She pulls on her jacket, the one with the faded unit patch sewn inside the lining, invisible unless you know where to look. The patch is from her dress uniform, cut out and stitched here by her own hand 17 years ago. A reminder. A talisman. A piece of the woman she had to become invisible. The badge that says Ashley Cooper, RN, goes back in her locker. She locks it. General Whitmore is stable. The heparin dosage is working despite being higher than protocol. By tomorrow, it probably won't matter. By tomorrow, Pierce will have moved on to some other way of establishing dominance, some other way of reminding the staff that he is the hierarchy and everyone else is just renting space beneath him. She had one chance to blend in. To disappear. To do her job without being noticed. That chance is already gone. What happened next would change everything, but not the way either of them expected. The semicircle of 12 residents shifted uncomfortably as Dr. Pierce gestured toward Ashley standing by the crash cart, her hand steady despite the weight of 17 pairs of eyes suddenly fixed on her like lasers. "This," Pierce announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man who had spent 2 decades learning that condescension was a weapon just as lethal as any scalpel, "is what happens when nursing schools prioritize compassion over competence." He paused, letting the words settle into the sterile air of St. Michael's grand rounds like a blade finding its mark. "Miss Cooper here," he used the word like an insult, stretched it thin, "represents the girl playing Florence Nightingale. She believes intuition trumps education. Yesterday, she questioned my post-operative anticoagulation protocol." One of the residents, a nervous woman with dark circles under her eyes, looked at her shoes. A nurse questioning a cardiovascular surgeon with 17 years of experience. Ashley took one measured breath. In Tikrit, she had held a sergeant's hand while his femoral artery bled out and never once allowed her voice to shake. She had coordinated medevac under sustained enemy contact with rounds snapping past her head like angry wasps. A cardiothoracic surgeon with a god complex and tenure was not going to break her composure. Not here. Not in front of an audience that Pierce had deliberately assembled to witness this public flaying. Pierce continued, drawing his words out like he had all the time in the world. "Her credentials are, shall we say, questionable." One of the male residents, a tall one who always ordered his coffee with unnecessary specifications, smiled. The smile was the problem. Not Pierce. The smile meant the poison was spreading. The smile meant the rumors had already taken root in the soil of institutional hierarchy, where a surgeon's word weighed more than a nurse's decade of experience. The smile meant she was watching her cover erode in real time, each lie building on the previous one, creating a wall between her and the general in room 412, the man she was supposed to be protecting. One tear escaped Ashley's left eye. Calculated. Precise. She let it fall, watched it reflect the fluorescent lights overhead, lights that hummed at a frequency that made her teeth ache after 8 hours. She wiped it away without breaking eye contact with Pierce, her hand moving with the same discipline she'd learned in field medicine when tears were salt water that could compromise sterile technique. "I've triaged soldiers with more integrity in their last breath than you've shown in your entire career," she said quietly. Not a whisper. Not a shout. A statement delivered with the kind of certainty that comes from having actually held another person's life in your hands. Every single one of them. The room went dead silent. The ventilator in the distance wheezed its mechanical rhythm. Somewhere down the hallway, a monitor beeped twice, then resumed its steady pulse. Pierce's face reddened in a way that Ashley recognized immediately, not anger, but the flush of a man realizing he'd miscalculated. He'd expected tears. He'd expected retreat. He'd expected the performance to work because it always worked when the audience was already on your side. "Get out," he said flatly. Ashley left without a word, her badge catching the light as she moved past the residents, each of whom suddenly found something very interesting about the floor tiles or the ceiling or literally anywhere that wasn't her face. The door hissed shut behind her. In the hallway, her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. She walked to the supply closet near the break room and allowed herself exactly 90 seconds of silence before returning to her patients, because that's what soldiers did, they compartmentalized and moved forward. But the damage was already calculated in Pierce's surgical mind. By that afternoon, he had infected 3 separate nurses with the story. "She told me she got her credentials online. I think the state board should really look into her background. Who knows if her licenses are even real?" The rumors moved through St. Michael's like antibiotic-resistant bacteria, finding the warm places where institutional gossip thrived. By Tuesday morning, the pharmacy had started requiring double verification on every medication Ashley dispensed. By Wednesday, she found herself reassigned to float duties on the medical surgical floor, away from the intensive care unit, away from the complex cases, away from room for 12 and General Whitmore. Tuesday afternoon, 1,400 hours exactly, vending machine alcove on the 3rd floor. The space was narrow, fluorescent lit, humming with a kind of white noise that swallowed sound. Ashley was buying coffee, black, no sugar, fuel more than beverage, when Pierce appeared flanked by 2 residents. The tall one. Another woman, younger, maybe 30. Both of them had that fresh predatory energy of junior physicians learning that cruelty was just hierarchy wearing scrubs. Still here, Florence? Pierce's smile was surgical. Precise. I'm surprised security hasn't escorted the pretender out yet. He turned to the residents with the casual ease of a man watching an execution he'd already approved. Anyone can print a diploma. Background checks take time. The implication hung there like a held breath: she was a fraud. An imposter. A woman playing dress-up in a profession that should have rejected her months ago. Ashley's hands didn't shake. They never did. She set her coffee down on the vending machine's narrow shelf, and when she met his eyes, something shifted in the alcove's air pressure. It wasn't aggression. It was something colder. Something that had seen worse than condescension. Something that had held a bleeding man in the dark while rockets fell like rain. Do you practice cowardice, doctor, or does it come naturally? Her voice had dropped half an octave. The residents exchanged a glance. Pierce's smile froze. I've never seen a man with your credentials hide behind rumors to compensate for genuine insecurity, but I suppose there's always a first time. She picked up her coffee without breaking eye contact. Excuse me. She walked past them toward the stairwell. Behind her, one of the residents, the woman, made a small sound that might have been a laugh or might have been recognition of something dangerous. Pierce said nothing. His silence was worse than any comeback because it meant he understood that he'd been seen. Not as a target. As a threat he needed to neutralize more aggressively. That evening, from his office with the door closed, Pierce made 4 phone calls with the kind of methodical precision he brought to his surgical cases. First, to Chief of Staff Brennan at his country club during dinner, I have concerns about Captain Cooper's background that I think warrant immediate review. Second, to HR Director Martinez in her car on the way home, I need her complete personnel file. Now. Third, to Security Chief Wallace at the hospital's main desk, I want a quiet flag on Ashley Cooper's access badge. Full review before any patient interaction. Fourth, to the scheduling coordinator in the ICU, I need Cooper removed from critical care rotations indefinitely. Routine medical surgical only. By Wednesday morning at 0600 hours, Ashley discovered her locker reassigned. Someone had removed her name from the ICU staff board and placed it in oncology. Her badge access to the 4th floor, where room 412 was located, had been restricted to emergencies only. The walls were closing in with the kind of professional precision that made rumors look like kindness. General Whitmore was scheduled to transfer to Walter Reed in 24 hours for follow-up cardiac rehabilitation. 72 hours remaining in her operational window before the target left her jurisdiction. Pierce had orchestrated an institutional isolation that cut her off from the only patient who mattered, and he'd done it cleanly enough that nothing looked malicious, just standard protocol, routine reassignments, basic credentials verification. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next changed everything. Dr. Pierce's reassignment notice arrived at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning, printed on hospital letterhead and sealed with the kind of clinical precision that made Ashley's jaw clench exactly once before her face went neutral. Post-surgical recovery. 2nd floor. Effective immediately. The memo cited staffing optimization and cross-departmental rotation protocols, words that meant nothing, a bureaucratic smokescreen for surgical removal of a problem he couldn't eliminate directly. He couldn't fire her. Not yet. But he could isolate her. He could cut her off from General Whitmore like a surgeon cauterizing a bleeding artery, and Ashley understood this with the same instinctive clarity she'd learned in Tikrit watching IED patterns and ambush geometry. The 2nd floor was 3 floors down and a world away from the ICU. Post-surgical recovery meant stable patients, routine vitals, predictable 4-hour checks. It meant no access to the general's monitoring systems. It meant no proximity to room 412. It meant mission failure, and Pierce had just weaponized hospital policy to accomplish what his rumors couldn't, removing her from operational range of her target. Ashley folded the memo once, then twice, her hands moving with mechanical precision as she placed it in her locker beside the faded unit patch sewn into her jacket lining, that patch from the 3rd Special Forces Group that pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat whenever she remembered her son was still deployed in Helmand Province. The patch represented 3 tours, 14 soldiers brought home from Tikrit, a general who had led them through hell and back. She reported to second-floor nursing at 0700 hours. The charge nurse, a woman named Joanne with 18 years of orthopedic experience and zero awareness of what Ashley actually was, handed her a patient assignment sheet with apologetic eyes. For post-surgical hip replacements in rooms 214 through 217. 1 cholecystectomy recovery in 220. Routine. Boring. Strategically useless. Joanne explained the rotation was temporary, just a few weeks to help with census management, but Ashley had already calculated the timeline. A few weeks was exactly how long the general would remain in St. Michael's before transfer to Walter Reed for rehabilitation. After that, her presence here became liability rather than asset. Pierce had found the vulnerability in her cover and exploited it like a scalpel between ribs. By Wednesday, the restrictions tightened further. A new staff memo, also circulated by Pierce, established revised patient assignment protocols. ICU nurses would handle their own patients exclusively. No cross-floor coverage. No exceptions. No to informal monitoring of other units. The language was clever, it sounded like standard procedure, the kind of thing any hospital might implement. But it was precision targeting. It was designed to keep her eyes off the monitors that tracked General Whitmore's vital signs, to ensure that when the general's condition changed, and Ashley's combat-trained instincts told her it would, she would be 3 floors down, unable to respond, unable to intervene, deliberately positioned to fail. Dr. Pierce had moved from social sabotage into strategic territory. Rumors were amateur work. This was institutional weaponization. He'd weaponized hierarchy itself, used policy language and bureaucratic authority to isolate his target. Ashley recognized it because she'd seen officers use exactly this method in Iraq, not brute force, but systematic dismantling of operational capacity. Cut the supply lines. Remove the intelligence. Position the opposition where they can see the threat but not reach it. It was competent work, and that made it dangerous. By Thursday night, she'd tested the boundaries. During her shift on the 2nd floor, she'd moved past the nursing station toward the storage closet near the main stairs, the route that gave her a clear sightline to the hallway that connected to the ICU elevator. A subtle repositioning. Nothing that violated protocol. The night charge nurse, Marcus Chen, a man whose competence was matched only by his complete absence of curiosity about his co-worker's business, hadn't questioned it. Ashley had retrieved the blood pressure cuff, returned to her assignment, and in those 15 seconds had glimpsed the bank of monitors mounted on the ICU wall, screens displaying heart rates and oxygen saturations for each patient in units 414 through 420. But that was Tuesday. On Wednesday, the monitors moved. Physically relocated to the interior nursing station, hidden behind the ICU doors, visible only to assigned personnel. Pierce had anticipated her. He'd moved the goal before she could reach it. At 0130 hours on Friday morning, Ashley sat at the 2nd floor nursing station during her chart review, the only nurse present on her unit, hip replacements and cholecystectomy patient sleeping in pharmacological peace, and opened her personal laptop to check email. The hospital Wi-Fi was restricted, but the general's secure transmission would come through encrypted channels, routed through a VPN that the Pentagon intelligence apparatus had installed during her initial briefing 6 months ago. When the email arrived with subject line census report, she opened it and found embedded in what appeared to be routine administrative data a 7-line message from the Director of Operations at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Captain Cooper, your continued assignment remains active and critical. General Whitmore's medical data indicates probable post-surgical complications developing in cardiac perfusion markers. Recommend heightened monitoring protocol. Your presence in proximity to patient remains mission essential. Operational clearance maintained despite institutional obstacles. Acknowledge receipt. Destroy message. The words appeared in white text on a black background, the kind of message that would vanish the moment she closed the email: military-grade operational communication delivered through a channel that left no trace. The Pentagon knew about Pierce's reassignment. The Pentagon knew about the isolation protocol. And the Pentagon was telling her that the threat to General Whitmore was real, that her instincts about his condition were justified, and that her mission, the reason she'd left her son in the care of her sister and accepted a nursing position using credentials that were real but covered stories that were not, was not over. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Ashley closed the email. The message dissolved. She deleted the empty thread and cleared the cache with the kind of mechanical precision that came from 6 years of classified operations, from a time when the wrong email left on the wrong screen could cost lives. Her hands were steady. Her breathing remained even. Around her, the hospital hummed with the white noise of night shift machinery, ventilators in neighboring rooms, the distant hiss of oxygen flowing through wall lines, fluorescent lights buzzing their electronic song in a frequency only exhausted medical personnel learned to ignore. She returned to her charts. Vital signs, intake and output, post-surgical wound assessments. Routine documentation. But her mind was already calibrating. The general was developing complications. Pierce had isolated her from direct access to his care. The ICU monitoring stations were now hidden behind locked doors. And somewhere 4 floors above her, a man who had led 14 soldiers home from a combat zone, the same combat zone where she'd learned to distinguish the sound of different rifle caliber impacts, where she'd triaged casualties with her hands while her brain processed threat assessment, where she'd earned the patch sewn into her jacket lining through acts she could never describe to another living person except one, was deteriorating in a hospital room where the assigned nurse was following routine protocols written by a man trying to protect his career. Ashley pulled up the second-floor monitor display on her station computer, the system that was supposed to show only her assigned patients. The security restrictions prevented external access to ICU feeds. But the system architecture, installed by hospital IT contractors who had no idea they were building surveillance infrastructure, had one vulnerability. The network router required all displays to refresh through a centralized server. The server maintained a cache. And the cache, if accessed through a terminal using credentials from an account that had been created 6 months ago with the full authorization of the hospital's Chief Medical Information Officer, authorization that Chief Medical Information Officer had received from a phone call made by someone claiming to be from corporate risk management but who was actually working for a Pentagon contractor, could display every monitor on the network simultaneously, even the ones that were supposedly secured. It took her 90 seconds to navigate the back-end access. Another 30 seconds to pull up the ICU feed. Another 5 to locate room for 12. General Whitmore's vital signs appeared in digital green text against a black background. Heart rate, 84. Oxygen saturation, 97%. Respiratory rate, 24. Blood pressure, 118/76. All within acceptable range. All appearing normal. Except the respiratory rate was elevated. Normal post-operative respiration was 16 to 20 breaths per minute. 24 meant something was triggering compensatory breathing. Something wasn't right. The oxygen number was good, which meant it wasn't hypoxemia yet. But the respiratory rate increase suggested the body was anticipating it. The body was preparing for something. Ashley closed the screen and logged out. The access window disappeared. The monitors returned to displaying only her for assigned patients, all of them stable, all of them trending toward normal post-operative recovery. She made notes on her charts. She checked on her patients at 0200 hours, finding them exactly as she'd left them, quiet, pain-controlled, healing. She made documentation entries that would show she'd maintained perfect protocol compliance, that she'd remained on her assigned unit, that she'd never approached the ICU, that she'd caused no trouble and crossed no institutional lines. But she knew what she'd seen. She knew what the Pentagon had told her. And she knew that sometime in the next 12 to 18 hours, the general's condition would change. The respiratory rate would climb. The oxygen would drop. The pressure would build in that pleural space where air accumulates after surgical trauma, compressing the lung, pinching off blood return, creating a cascade of cardiopulmonary failure that kills fast if you don't understand the mechanism. She had 14 minutes of oxygen saturation drop before cardiac arrest. 14 minutes before the general's heart stopped. And she was 3 floors away, deliberately positioned to fail, exactly where Dr. Pierce had placed her. At 0200 hours exactly, the ventilator's mechanical wheeze filled General Whitmore's room like a metronome counting down to something neither of them could stop. Ashley stood at his bedside, her eyes scanning the monitors with the precision of someone who had read vital signs by moonlight in convoy trucks and forward operating bases. The numbers told a story her hands already knew. Tracheal deviation. Oxygen saturation dropping in real time, 94 to 92 to 89, the color draining from his face like someone pulling a plug from his chest. His jugular veins distended, swollen ropes of blue beneath the skin. Tension pneumothorax. The collapsed lung pressing against his heart. The silent killer that didn't announce itself until it was nearly too late. She had seen this before. 11 times in Tikrit, usually after IED blasts, usually when medics arrived to find soldiers turning the color of wet concrete and running out of minutes. This was not a nurse problem. This was a soldier problem. And Captain Ashley Cooper was still a soldier, even if she wore scrubs and her rank lived in classified files the Pentagon kept locked in buildings without names. The room was empty except for the monitors and the breathing machine and one sleeping general who was about to stop breathing. The night shift charge nurse was 2 floors down on a break. The trauma bay was quiet. The world was small, and it consisted of this bed and these numbers and her hands, which moved before her mind caught up to what she was doing. She opened the crash cart without ceremony. 14-gauge angiocath needle. The same size she had used in Fallujah, in Sanjan Valley, in the 100 nameless places between. The needle was a tool. Tools didn't hesitate. Tools didn't think about scope of practice or state boards or the fact that Dr. Pierce had made it very clear that her credentials were tissue paper in a hurricane. The needle just worked. She located the second intercostal space, midclavicular line. She pressed her palm flat against his ribs, feeling for the landmarks. Her fingers had held together wound edges during medevacs and stanched arterial bleeding in vehicles rocking on cratered roads. Ribs were the same in San Antonio as they were in Iraq. The anatomy didn't care about geography or the color of your uniform or whether you had permission slips from people who had never heard a patient's last breath sound like gravel. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. She didn't think about her son Marcus, who was supposed to be asleep in a house 17 blocks away, who had no idea his mother was about to violate every regulation in the nursing handbook. Muscle memory took over, the kind that lived in shoulders and hands and the place in the brain where training becomes instinct. The needle slid between the ribs. There was resistance, then release. The hiss of pressurized air escaping. Sudden and clean and unmistakable. Like a tire deflating in fast motion. The sound that meant she had found the pocket of collapsed lung, the pocket of pressure that had been squeezing his heart like a fist. Whitmore gasped, a real gasp, not a ventilator-assisted breath, but the sound of a man's lungs suddenly remembering how to expand. His eyes flew open. His color changed from ash-gray to something approaching human in the space of 5 seconds. She secured the catheter with tape, hand steady as a surgical laser. The monitors began their climb. Oxygen saturation 89. Then 92. Then 95. His heart rate stabilized. His blood pressure crept up from the basement. The general's eyes found hers, unfocused at first, then sharpening with recognition of something he couldn't quite name. Something in her bearing. Something in the way she moved that belonged in operating rooms under fire, not in hospital rooms under fluorescent lights. He whispered something. His voice was small, distant. She pressed one finger to her lips, not a request, it was a command, and his eyes fluttered closed again, the tension finally releasing from his face. The crisis had passed. The patient was stable. The monitors hummed their recovery song. But that wasn't the worst part. At 0217 hours, Ashley was still documenting the vitals in the chart when the night shift charge nurse appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, tablet clutched to her chest. "Did you just—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The needle was in place. The oxygen numbers were too good to be coincidence. The charge nurse's face cycled through shock and understanding and something that looked like fear. "Ashley, you can't have done that. You're a nurse. You're just—" But the doors were already opening because the entire night shift had been watching through the glass. 3 nurses. 2 respiratory techs. An orderly who knew how to keep his mouth shut and would not. They had seen her hands move with the kind of precision that came from somewhere other than a community college BSN program. At 0234 hours, Dr. Pierce walked through the hospital doors still wearing wrinkled scrubs from the previous shift, presumably having slept in his office or not slept at all, the kind of man who always came back when he caught the scent of something he could weaponize. He took the stairs to the 4th floor. He stood in the doorway of Whitmore's room. He saw the general breathing easier. He saw the decompression needle secured in place. He saw Ashley standing beside the bed, monitors stable, patient color restored. His face showed no relief. No gratitude. No acknowledgement that death had just walked backward out of the room. His voice came out the color of stainless steel. "What have you done?" Ashley turned. She did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself. She handed him the chart with the same efficiency she would have used to hand off weapons in a convoy. Tension pneumothorax. Recognized at 0200. Needle decompression at 0142. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular. Patient is stable. The numbers were wrong because she had said 0142 and then 0200, but she was testing him, and he didn't catch it, and later that would matter more than anyone could know. Pierce's hands trembled as he took the chart. Not from relief. From rage. From the recognition that a nurse had just performed an invasive procedure and saved the patient's life and he could not claim credit for it. He turned without another word. "Charge nurse. Call security. I want her removed from this hospital within the hour." By 0800 hours, Ashley was sitting in the Chief of Staff's office in a wet cardigan because she had worn it home and then come back, had sat in her truck in the parking lot for 47 minutes before walking back inside. Dr. Morrison was a man in his early 60s with the tired eyes of someone who had made 1,000 impossible decisions and regretted roughly 900 of them. The office smelled like coffee and the particular staleness of institutional air that had been breathing the same recycled breath for 30 years. Dr. Pierce filed 3 separate complaints, Morrison said, reading from his tablet. Unauthorized procedure. Scope of practice violation. And he's requesting your immediate suspension pending credential verification. The words landed like stones in still water. Her nursing license was real, the Pentagon had ensured that much, had buried her credentials in databases that would hold up to casual scrutiny. But they would not hold up to hostile legal scrutiny from a man with 3 decades of institutional authority and a vested interest in destroying her credibility. The moment they ran the background check, the moment they called the school directly, the whole house of cards would collapse. Not because she wasn't a real nurse, she was. She had trained for 18 months. She had passed state boards. But because the people who had built her paperwork had built it for a cover that lasted exactly as long as the mission required, and the mission was now burning. "I saved his life," Ashley said. Her voice was flat. A statement of fact. Not a defense. Morrison nodded. "I know that. The nurses saw it. The respiratory text documented it. The general is asking for you specifically, wants you back on his case." He leaned back in his chair. "But Pierce says your credentials are suspect. He's already contacted the state board. He's threatening to file with the medical licensing board as well, claiming you misrepresented your qualifications. Even if he's wrong, the process will take months. The paperwork alone could bury you." Ashley said nothing. Her hands were very still in her lap. "I need to see your certifications," Morrison continued. "Your transcripts. The documentation from your nursing school. Everything. I need to be able to defend you when this becomes a legal matter. And it will become a legal matter. There was no documentation that could survive that kind of scrutiny. There was only the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the 3rd Special Forces Group insignia that lived against her ribs like a secret heartbeat, like the one piece of her identity that would never fit on official paperwork. Like the thing that had made her reach for a needle at 0200 hours when every regulation in every handbook told her not to move. Her son's unit. The general's command. The thing she could never explain without burning down the entire mission. "I'll get you the documents," Ashley heard herself say. She sounded like the version of herself who played a nurse, not the version who was one. The voice was different when you gave up. By 1100 hours, she had walked out of the hospital with a cardboard box. The guard at the security desk didn't make eye contact. The parking lot was bright and cruel and full of people going about their Thursday morning as if the world hadn't just pivoted on its axis. Inside the box, a cracked ceramic mug her son had made in 7th grade that read "World's Best Mom" in letters that had faded from repeated washing. A succulent plant with brown edges and leaves falling like lost days. A photograph of Marcus at 14, grinning in his school band uniform, holding a trumpet like it was the answer to something. The rain started as she reached the bus stop. Not a gentle rain. The kind of rain that came down like the sky was angry, like it had a personal grievance against everyone standing beneath it. The cardboard began to dissolve immediately. The mug slipped inside the failing box. The photograph started to warp. She sat on the bench anyway, not bothering to shield it, and watched the rain destroy the evidence that she had a life outside these gates. Her phone buzzed. Pentagon Officer Chen. The message was encrypted on a secure line she hadn't been supposed to use unless the mission was compromised beyond recovery. "Captain, we need to extract you. Your cover is compromised. Stand by for vehicle." Ashley did not respond. She sat on the bench in the rain with the dissolving box and the photograph of her son and the knowledge that she had failed at the one thing she had come here to do. She had been supposed to be invisible. She had been supposed to monitor without acting. She had been supposed to keep her hands still. But hands that had held lives together in Tikrit could not hold still when death was in the room. Some training went deeper than orders. Some instincts were older than protocols. The rain hammered down. She did not answer her phone. She did not accept extraction. She sat there as if sitting in the rain long enough might somehow change what was about to happen, might somehow make it so that a general and a boy with a shadow box full of medals would never have to find out what his nurse really was. She had no idea what was about to walk through those hospital doors. By noon, the rain hadn't stopped. It fell in sheets across San Antonio, hammering the parking lot like applause for a performance nobody wanted to see. Ashley Cooper walked toward the bus stop with a cardboard box balanced against her ribs, the kind of box that holds the remnants of a life someone else is discarding. Inside, a ceramic mug with faded lettering that read "World's Best Mom," a dying succulent with leaves like paper, and a photo of Marcus in dress uniform, his trombone polished to mirror shine, his smile the only thing in the world that still looked like hope. She didn't look back at St. Michael's. Looking back meant acknowledging that the last 6 months had been real, the cover, the mission, the 3 purple hearts folded in tissue paper in her apartment that no one at this hospital would ever know about. Her phone had been silent for 18 minutes. The Pentagon didn't do silence. Silence meant extraction was pending. Silence meant they were calculating how to pull her out without triggering an investigation into Operation Sentinel Shield. The bus stop shelter had a dent in the metal frame shaped like a fist. Ashley sat on the bench, box on her lap, rain dripping through a hole in the shelter roof that no one had bothered to fix. She'd sat in worse conditions. She'd waited for medevac helicopters under fire in Tikrit while 14 soldiers bled out around her, their hands gripping whatever part of her uniform they could reach, as if holding on to fabric meant holding on to life. Rain felt like mercy compared to that. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Marcus was about to learn his mother was a liar. A shadow crossed the rain-soaked pavement. Not an umbrella. Not the silhouette of a person walking past. The shadow of a boy carrying something that caught the light even through the downpour. Ashley's breath caught, muscle memory that had nothing to do with combat. That was her son's shadow. She would know it anywhere, in any weather, across any distance. Marcus appeared at the edge of the bus stop shelter, soaked through his jacket, holding a wooden shadow box against his chest like it weighed more than armor. Behind him, 20 feet back, nurses and orderlies and administrative staff had followed him out of the hospital, drawn by something they couldn't name. The kind of pull that comes when someone is about to break the world open. "Come on," Marcus said. Not a question. An extraction order delivered by a 16-year-old boy who'd never taken a tactical briefing in his life but had somehow inherited his mother's absolute certainty. "They need to see these." Ashley set the box down. Her hands were steady. That was training. Everything was training. Even this. The lobby of St. Michael's smelled like industrial antiseptic and something burning, probably the hospital's air filtration system, probably nothing to worry about. But the lobby was silent in a way that hallways aren't supposed to be silent. Doctors paused mid-stride. Patients in wheelchairs turned their heads. The kind of silence that precedes something irreversible. General Whitmore sat in a wheelchair near the entrance, the same wheelchair that had carried him through 3 cardiac surgeries and 2 near-death events. Dr. Pierce stood beside him, left hand resting on the chair's armrest with the casual possession of a man who'd spent 17 years believing the world bent to his will. The hospital board members flanked him like ornaments, their expressions already rehearsed for the press release they'd be issuing later. Marcus walked forward. Not fast. Not slow. Just with the kind of steady pace that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. He opened the shadow box. Inside, medals on burgundy silk. Bronze star. Silver star. 2 purple hearts. Beneath each, a nameplate engraved in precise military script. Captain Ashley Cooper. The name was a bomb. The general's eyes shifted first. Not his head. Just his eyes. They moved from Marcus to the box to the medals to the name and then, recognition. The kind of recognition that comes from having stood in the same fire with someone, from having watched them work miracles in the worst circumstances imaginable. His hand trembled slightly as he reached toward the box. "Reaper 6, he whispered. Not a question. A call sign. A summons. "Is that you?" Marcus's voice was steady in a way that made Ashley realize he'd inherited more than her shadow. Captain Ashley Cooper, for extraordinary heroism under fire in Tikrit, personally treating 14 casualties while coordinating air evacuation under sustained enemy contact. He read the citation like it was gospel. It was gospel. Every word was documented, verified, embedded in military records that classified systems had just exposed to a civilian hospital lobby. The colonels, Ashley recognized them now, one from the 3rd Special Forces Group, one from JSOC Command, straightened. Slowly. The way you stand when you understand you're in the presence of something that outranks your entire organizational chart. Dr. Pierce's voice came sharp and loud, like a scalpel cutting through anesthesia. "This is obviously fabricated." He said it 3 times in his mind before his mouth actually produced the words, but he said it. He had to say it. Admitting otherwise meant admitting he'd been wrong about everything. About her qualifications. About her character. About the entire foundation of his 17-year career built on the certainty that hierarchy meant competence. The general raised one trembling hand. Not a weapon. Not a threat. Just a hand moving upward in the universal gesture of authority requesting silence. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only the people closest to him could hear it clearly, but the lobby had gone so still that his words traveled like radio signals in vacuum. "Son, you will stand at attention when a decorated combat veteran enters the room." And then, from his wheelchair, General Whitmore rendered a salute. A full, precise, trembling military salute. His left hand couldn't move much, the cardiac surgery had damaged some of the nerve endings, but his right arm came up like it was still carrying the weight of command. Still commanding. The 2 colonels snapped to attention. Not parade ground attention. Combat attention. The kind where every muscle acknowledges hierarchy and respect and the weight of wars they'd both seen. One of them, the one with the third group patch, saluted back. So did the other. Someone's phone was recording. Ashley didn't know which staff member. Didn't matter. By the time the Pentagon officers arrived, two of them, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that said classified clearance and federal authority, the lobby had become a courtroom and General Whitmore had become a judge rendering a verdict on everything Dr. Pierce believed about himself. The senior officer, a woman with captain's bars and eyes like intelligence algorithms, approached Ashley directly. Captain Cooper, Operation Sentinel Shield is now compromised but complete. Your monitoring of General Whitmore during his recovery has confirmed our security protocols are intact. She said it like a mission statement. Like absolution. Your assignment is concluded. Dr. Pierce's face had gone the color of clinical antiseptic. His career wasn't ending in that moment. It had ended 47 seconds earlier, the moment Marcus opened the shadow box. But Pierce didn't know that yet. He stood there, still trying to construct narratives, still trying to weaponize language against a woman who'd just been authenticated by the United States military in front of 17 witnesses. The phone video didn't stop recording. It captured everything: Marcus's steady voice, the general's trembling salute, the colonel's snapping to attention, and Dr. Pierce's voice like a knife trying to cut steel, obviously fabricated, crystal clear, dated, time-stamped. By 1800 hours, the video had 47,000 views. By midnight, the numbers had shifted into territory that hospitals didn't recover from. 1.2 million views. Comments cascading like shrapnel: Dr. Mock's war hero. Physician attacks decorated soldier. This man teaches at Johns Hopkins Medical School. Someone tagged Dr. Raymond Chen, the legendary cardiovascular surgeon who'd mentored Pierce through his fellowship, who'd written recommendations that launched his career, who'd believed in him the way mentors do when they mistake cruelty for precision. At 0900 the next morning, Raymond Chen released a public statement that moved through the medical profession like a bullet through glass. I taught Marcus Pierce surgical technique. I did not teach him character. His actions toward a decorated combat veteran represent a failure of values I cannot overlook. I formally disown my association with Dr. Pierce and recommend the medical board investigate his fitness to practice medicine. It wasn't a suggestion. Coming from Chen, it was a directive backed by 50 years of credibility and 17 published textbooks and a reputation that hospitals actually listened to. The hospital board convened at 1100. By 1145, Dr. Pierce was on administrative leave pending investigation. His 17 years of service, his 847 successful surgeries, his publications and presentations and carefully curated professional reputation, all of it suspended pending review. The viral video had 4.3 million views. The hospital's major donors were calling with questions about institutional judgment. The board review accelerated like a medical emergency requiring immediate intervention. 3 more complaints surfaced within hours. A dismissed nurse's aide who Pierce had falsely accused of theft 2 years ago. A resident whose fellowship applications he'd sabotaged after she'd reported him for dismissive treatment. A patient from 1997 whose post-operative care he'd delegated to interns while he attended a golf tournament, resulting in complications that nearly cost the patient her life. The pattern was unmistakable. Not a single incident. A career arc of calculated cruelty dressed up as standards enforcement. By week's end, the hospital board stripped Dr. Pierce of his clinical credentials. His privileges were terminated. His malpractice insurance carriers were notified. His hospital office was sealed. His wife, who'd spent 18 years pretending she didn't see the person her husband actually was, served him divorce papers citing irretrievable breakdown. 3 days later, she changed the locks. He packed his office alone at night, filling the same kind of cardboard boxes that Ashley had carried. His hand shook, not with fear, but with rage at the injustice of it all. He'd followed every protocol. He'd protected standards. He'd maintained hierarchies that meant something. And the world had punished him for it. In his mind, he remained the victim, the one person who'd actually cared about quality and accountability while everyone else bent the rules for sympathy and sentiment. He would spend years in this narrative, never understanding why. 6 months later, Ashley Cooper stood in her new office on the 7th floor of the VA Hospital System San Antonio Administrative Center. Deputy Director. A title that meant something, though not the way titles usually did. The windows looked south across the medical district toward St. Michael's, visible from this height like a small white ship navigating the urban landscape. On her office wall, the faded 3rd Special Forces Group unit patch, finally framed, finally visible, finally no longer a secret sewn into jacket linings. Beside it, Marcus's photo in his dress uniform. Beside that, her medals displayed the way they were meant to be displayed, not hidden, not claimed by classified operations, but present. The intercom buzzed. Whitmore's arrival had been announced. The general walked in using a cane now, cardiac rehabilitation still ongoing, but moving like a man whose body was finally catching up to his will. Reaper 6, he said, and it wasn't a code name anymore. It was a greeting between soldiers. The Pentagon wants you for the Joint Medical Command. Full disclosure, full authority, program oversight. Ashley shook her head. I'm done with cover identities, sir. I want to help people without hiding who I am. Whitmore smiled. It was a small thing, barely visible, but it was the smile of someone who finally understood. Then you're exactly where you belong. She walked him to the window. From this height, the city spread out like a map of all the places she'd been, all the identities she'd worn, all the wars she'd fought in uniforms and in scrubs and in cardboard boxes carrying the remnants of demolished lives. Somewhere down there, in a community college classroom, Dr. Pierce was teaching CPR compression rhythms to bored teenagers checking their phones between representatives. $18 an hour. No hospital affiliation. No prestige. No future. Ashley felt nothing about that. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just the quiet recognition of waste, waste of talent, waste of years, waste of a man who'd chosen cruelty over growth. That evening, Marcus texted from rehearsal, concert tonight. 7 p.m. you coming? For the first time in 6 months, Ashley didn't calculate risk assessment or operational security or the variables of public exposure. She typed back immediately, front row. She wore her dress uniform. Full medals. The unit patch pinned to her collar catching the auditorium lights like a small beacon finally brought out of the dark. When Marcus saw her from the stage, trombone in hand, his smile could have lit the whole city. After the concert, in the parking lot under San Antonio stars, he asked, "Do you miss it? The missions? The secrets?" Ashley touched the unit patch on her collar. The mission was always getting home to you. What did you learn? Marcus asked. From all of it. Ashley looked at the stars, the same ones that had watched over Tikrit, over St. Michael's ICU, over that rain-soaked bench where everything had collapsed and then been rebuilt into something stronger. Power is not a title. Power is the ability to help. They drove home together, windows down, radio playing something Marcus was humming along with. Somewhere across the city, Pierce taught chest compressions to students who didn't know his name. He would never understand that the nurse he'd tried to destroy had saved more lives in one night than he'd saved in 17 years, not because of credentials, not because of hierarchy, but because of who she was when no one was watching. The unit patch on Ashley's office wall caught the morning light. Faded, but still visible. Still true. If you've made it this far, you know the power of underestimating someone. If you've ever been judged by someone who didn't know your story, hit that subscribe button. Comment below, what would you have done in Ashley's position? And share this with someone who needs to remember that quiet strength is the strongest kind. Thank you for watching.